month, NASM is giving you free courses. That's right, free courses each month just for being part of the NASM family. Learn about everything ranging from nutrition to strength, weight loss to stress relief, and everything in between. Click the link in the bio for information and to claim your free course before they're gone.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Random Fit. I am Wendy Batson here with my friend, colleague, and co-host, Mr. Ken Miller. How are you?
I am good, Wendy. Always good to be with you.
You as well. And today's topic, low back pain. So we have actually kind of done this as a series. And, unfortunately, we're like, okay, what do we notice every single day with our clients? And it's usually like, oh, my shoulder hurts, or I woke up kind of weird and my low back hurts, or my ankle hurts and my knee hurts. So you know what? We just wanted to go through all the major joints. And so today we landed on low back pain. And Ken, I know you know this, but one of the reasons that we also wanted to talk about this in this episode is because 80% of our population has either had or will have low back pain sometime in their life. So seems like a pretty good topic to touch on.
Yeah, especially because it's affecting so many of us here, especially in the United States with, people working from home. But one of the things, and Wendy, I want to get your perspective on this, is that I've actually had more inquiries and actually a couple new clients that are on the younger set as far as being high school, even junior high, when it comes to having these low back issues, because again, a lot of them took a year off or had a modified competition schedule, and now they're going full bore, right? Now that seasons are in full effect for sports. Now they're trying to do sports again, but having taken a year off, or like I said, modified schedule, and they're sitting, they've been sitting around, before school's opened up again. And, unfortunately, I'm getting more feedback from younger kids as far as having tightness or experiencing some kind of low back issue, especially during activity, whether it be running or throwing or whatever it is that they may be doing. So unfortunately, the population that we're addressing this topic with has gotten bigger.
Yes. And, it's interesting because actually about a month ago, I had a 15-year-old. I actually worked on their parents before, but I had one of the father actually called me and said, hey, my daughter has experienced some low back pain. She's a competitive gymnast, ready for this, competitive gymnast at 15, and spends 3 to 4 hours a day, okay, 5 days a week, in the gym doing, whatever routines she's like, and of course the first thing you hear is, oh, but she's so flexible. And, and when I actually assessed her and looked at her, she's extremely flexible because, think about the amount of hours she's doing some of the stuff that she's doing. But there's really an important concept here is there's something called relative flexibility, which means you're super, flexible in particular joints, or, one side of a joint. But think about what's happening on the other side. It's actually being compressed. That can lead to irritation. Plus, she had a huge curve in her low back because of the ending position. They actually teach you how to arch and throw your shoulders and chest back every time you land whether it's a jumping pass or you're doing something on the vault. And so, when you think about this, one of the most common causes, like you said, is not just sports and everything, but it's the repetitiveness that you're doing every single day. So whether you are that weekend warrior that plays sports and you're super competitive over the weekend, or you're the desk jockey that sits, or you're the mom that has the hip hike because you have a brand new baby and you have to hold on to it while you're doing the dishes and doing everything of life, all of these things, and just stress in general can lead to low back pain. And so hopefully by the time you're done listening to this amazing episode of Random Fit with Ken Miller and myself, you guys are going to feel amazing if you are starting to get some low back pain, or you think you may be a future victim to low back pain.
Yeah. Well, hopefully not. With that statistic that you put out there, Wendy, earlier, 80% of the population has had or is experiencing some kind of low back issue. But there are those 20% that don't. So there is, light at the end of the tunnel. And, when you brought up that gymnast client of yours. One of the things that I did when I was a strength coach at Cal, one of the teams that I had was women's gymnastics. And unfortunately, for as being as graceful and as powerful as they are for the sport that they do, not one of them didn't have some kind of low back issue, at some point in time. Some that was more, prevalent and chronic than others, but for the most part, they would, the funniest thing is when I worked with them the first day and I was showing them a kneeling hip flexor stretch, and Wendy, how much we love, opening up the front of the hip. Well, one of them goes into that stretch and she just gets into this nice big lunge and she's like, oh, this is easy. And then she arches her back into it, right? So she gets in there, she's driving her knee forward and she's arching her back. And she says to me, and you talk about relative flexibility, that was her first lesson in relative flexibility, because all that motion was coming out of the low back and not the front of the hip. So she had all this range of motion, but it was coming out of the wrong place. And so one of the first lessons was, all right, let's go ahead and move into this slowly. Let's tuck your hips under, squeeze the cheeks, a little bit of activation through the midsection. And then lo and behold, she's like, whoa, I have never felt that stretch in that area like that before. So that's just one of those things where you can, when we talk about flexibility, which is one big part about low back issues, or actually a lot of injury issues to begin with, is there's going to be limited range of motion someplace. And as far as the low back is concerned, part of that is coming from the front of the hip. And then, looking at some of the strategies you can incorporate yourself to get yourself out of that stressful position does require not just a good exercise selection, but it also requires good technique. So you can get, someone like your gymnast and have the best exercise for them, but unless they learn to get away from something that they've been taught over and over and over again, because like you said, they're just taught to arch their back and they're really good at it. Unfortunately, they're too good at it. So
what you're saying then is more is not better. So you want to think, oh, it's all about positioning. And that is I think, a big key.
Yeah.
So, here's kind of basically, I say this all the time and Ken laughs at me, but the short and skinny of all of this is, most of the time, as Ken just mentioned, people's hips are super tight. You're in a seated position, so the front of the hip is in a crunch position. If you're a runner, you're constantly having to lift up your knee. So a knee drive, it requires your hip to flex. Like everything is basically causing repetitive motion where that hip flexor in the front of your hips is in a shortened position. And the thing is those of you guys that are new and don't even think about anatomy, but where you're trying to figure out what we're talking about, is if you're in a seated position, your body now thinks, okay, this is what it's used to. That becomes the new norm. So when you try to stand up, if you've been in a seated position for a long period of time, those muscles in the front of your hips remain in a short and tight position because they've been in that position for so long throughout the day. And so if they stay in a shortened position, then it kind of throws your hips kind of in a forward position, which means it's going to increase that low back arch. And those of you guys that are like, I don't know what she's talking about, if you want to just stand up and you actually like arch your back, and continuously hold that and really try to make a huge arch, that's your normal position when your hips are tight. It might be exaggerated, but we're trying to get you to feel that. So think about the compression of the discs in the lower back. And so if we can get you to stretch out the front of your hip and bring your pelvis in a more neutral position, it starts to let go of that lower compression to those vertebrae in your lumbar spine, and you get some relief just by doing one specific stretch. And as Ken mentioned, if you're really arching your back and going into like a forward lunge and you're like, oh, but I feel it in the front of my hip. Well, there's a muscle called your psoas that attaches to every one of those lumbar spine in your back, and it's a hip flexor. So instead of leaning forward, just kneel down into a 90-90. So the front leg's in a 90-degree position, the back leg's in a 90-degree position. Suck in your tummy and tuck your butt underneath, and then you should feel a stretch. Something that simple. You can do it at home, hold 30 seconds, relax, do it again if you want, do the other side. I mean, we were trying to give you guys some quick tips that you can do, but open up the front house, and then you need to strengthen the big old booty in the back.
One thing I want to put out there too, Wendy, is like, I don't want it to sound like we're oversimplifying it, but what we are addressing are postures and positions that most of us are incorporating. And like you said, it's just as an overuse issue, right? You sit down too long. You have a lot of mileage when it comes to running. Whatever it is, you're doing a lot of. And it's really easy to pick on the front of the hips because that's what most of us wind up doing, right? We sit down too, whether you're behind the TV, the monitor, your laptop, your phone or your tablet.
Or you live in California and in Atlanta, and you're just stuck in traffic all the time. That's another thing. So
yeah. Well, that's the thing, right? Traffic is on the rise again, right?
I know.
Yeah, I know. I know. It's like now I have to look at my watch and say, it's 4:30. I don't know if I should head out there right now. Before it's like 4:30, I'll be there in 10 minutes. But whatever it is, you're doing a lot of, and there are other things you can look at as far as tightness is concerned. Or we talk about overactivity, and Wendy, you picked on one, which is the front of the hips, the hip flexor. But again, another major muscle that crosses over the hips that can be a little overactive and doing a little too much is, a lot of people don't give this a lot of credit, especially when it comes to the hips, is your lats, right? Because of how it affects that low back position, because of how it connects into your pelvis, promoting that low back arch. So again, if you have a monitor or a keyboard in front of you, chances are your shoulders are going to be forward. You're going to be hunched over a little bit. And this muscle, even though if it connects to the upper arm and then streams down the backside, it affects not just the low back, but also the shoulders. So one benefit of addressing that area is the fact that you're going to get more bang for your buck because you affect the upper body and the lower body. But again, when we talked about regional interdependence and the fact that no one region of the body operates in and of itself, it depends on other areas of the body doing what they're supposed to do. So we can talk about the low back, but we would be, incomplete in our answer if we didn't consider that the low back has a neighbor below, which is your hips, your backside, and then it has a neighbor above, which is now your upper spine, your thoracic spine. So in order to relieve tension or get the low back to function better, we have to look at the neighbor north and south of the low back to offer some relief and decrease some of the tension that does pass through that region.
Oh, very good. Very important muscle. Absolutely. And those of you guys that are just joining us, my name is Wendy Batts. I'm here with Ken Miller, and we're talking about training through injury, specifically the lower back this time. And Ken obviously just talked about the lats. And to your point, Ken, I usually will tell people, if when in doubt, foam roll the lats, stretch your lats, because to your point, it can cause roundness in the shoulders. It can cause like that neck tension and obviously the compression to your lower back. And, for those of you guys that aren't sure how to roll or use the foam roller for your lats, it's not that you're rolling your entire back. It's actually you're laying on your side and sticking it in your armpit region. And that usually people are like, oh, really? And I'm like, yeah. Because, and so if you think about you're laying on your side, your arm is extended by your ear, and you put the roller underneath your armpit and you roll to pretty much the bottom of the rib, or I should say the bottom of the shoulder blade, and then roll in the upper armpit region and just kind of find that tender spot and marinate on it. You will be super surprised how uncomfortable that may feel in the very beginning, but then how much relief you get. I mean, just after a few sessions of doing that, if not even immediately. Yeah. I'm all about the roller. Give me a good roller. Yeah.
And, and just to show the relationship, just a quick exercise that some of you guys can do, whether you're watching us or if you're listening to us in your car on your long commute home as you sit in that hip flex position, something that you can do when you're not behind the wheel is what I like to tell students or even my clients, just to show them how important the upper body is relative to the hips. I'll have them put their hands across their shoulders, right? And I'll have them flex their spine, right? Slouch, exaggerated slouch. and then rotate right and left. And then what I'll have them do is I'll have them sit up nice and tall, so it's like you're the top of your head has a string tied to it and it's pulling you up towards the ceiling. Get your elbows up and now rotate left to right. And the question I like to pose to them is, okay, where do you feel you had more range of motion? All right, it's when your spine was tall, when your elbows were up. So what that does is it frees up those vertebrae to move, right? And you have, of course, now better recruitment of your muscles to turn left and right. So if you're walking is about counter rotating of the shoulders and the hips. So if your shoulders are turning to the right, your hips are turning to the left. So if I can get better rotation through my upper body, I'm going to stand to get more rotation, or the ability to get more rotation. At least my upper body is not restricting my hips from rotating to the opposite direction. And because you have now that liberated movement, I'll say, just to pull out a good Scrabble.
Liberated.
I'm liberated. I feel so
free.
liberated. I'm free. You freed up the low back, which actually, that's a great Scrabble word, right? Yeah.
Wow.
So from that standpoint, you're allowing stress to disperse throughout the body versus getting locked in on one specific area. And I think that's where, if you talk about low back tension, it doesn't have to be pain, again, within the scope of a personal trainer's practice. We're not there to address pain. We are there to address movement and movement dysfunction when it's observable. But when it comes to getting the hips and the shoulders to move, one of the things that we have to do is free up the shoulders, free up the hips, and that'll allow that low back to do what it's supposed to do, which is more stabilizing.
Well, I think that's an important key too, because when you think about the spine, I mean, just know this: your cervical spine, which is like your neck region, and your lower back should, as Ken just mentioned, it should be stable. The only portion of basically your spine should be your thoracic spine. So basically the shoulder blade area should be more mobile. And unfortunately, because of the rounded shoulders, everything we're doing forward head, just in a forward position, being on a keyboard, looking down at your phone, just basically life that brings us forward, then it's actually limiting the mobility that we have in the mid back. And so we're trying to get now mobility from the lower back, which should be stable. And so we should be getting the mobility from the hips. And so if you play golf, if you play tennis, if you play a rotational sport, lacrosse, anything, you should really be able to get your hips moving and work on your glutes being powerful. So therefore your lower back can stabilize your hips instead of it being the prime mover of something. And that's when you start to hear people are like, oh, I've got, bulging discs, or I need, I've got, like, what is it? L1, L2 or L3, like you hear all these same areas because people's sacrum gets locked, and it should actually move. As you extend, it should move. As you rotate, it should move. I mean, not excessively, but it should actually have some movement. And unfortunately, because we do these repetitive movements, some of these bones and muscles just kind of get locked down and adheres. And so therefore it really does cause just that uneasy feeling. Like you just feel like you can't move. You're not as mobile. You're not as free. And it's like, as you said, pull up, if you try to extend your spine, like you said, with the string, and you pull yourself up, give your erectors, which is what holds you straight up, give them a break. they're asking for help. Yeah.
We all need help. Now, Wendy, I know you're probably sick of me saying this phrase when it comes to the low back. No, well, there's that. No, that's your phrase. But the phrase I like to put out there, especially when it comes to the hip and the low back region, is what the hips lack hurts the back. Right? Are you tired of me saying that? Yeah.
No, I just think it's Shakira. I mean, I think if she was locked down, she wouldn't have her moves, and
Hey, she wouldn't be the artist.
Shakira.
Yeah, she wouldn't be the artist we know her to be today. But the phrase I like to put out there is what the hips lack hurts the back. And just to give credit where credit is due, I get that from my friend and colleague, mentor down in San Diego, Anthony Carey, who's brought that to my attention. And that's where I was like, oh, that's really helped me gain the concept of, okay, if the hips are lacking mobility, if the hips lack stability, if they lack strength, well, guess where all of that has to come from, right? The low back is usually what takes the hit. So like you said, Wendy, you know, we often get posed with comments like, yeah, I've got, you know, it's in my MRI that my L4, L5, L4, L3, somewhere in that region, there's some kind of, you know, disc issue. So when the hips don't move well, and we're not just talking about front to back, like, you know, sitting down or even running, we're talking about your ability to rotate the hips, to turn the hips in, to turn the hips out. Because when we walk, your hips are doing a lot of rotation because, you know, the femur has to connect into the hip socket, right? And if there's lack of rotation there, that's going to affect how the pelvis moves. And to your point, Wendy, you know, one bone's connected to the other bone, so that will affect how the SI joint moves or doesn't move, right? So if we can't share that tension, there's going to be a locking down of the joint, if you will, just to put it very simply. And then things get acclimated towards moving a certain range of motion. And again, because of that repetitive motion, the body gets used to that, which unfortunately, it's the joint that takes the hit and all that compression, because we can't move well as far as accelerating and moving into a position, as well as decelerating. That's us, you know, as an example of that is now if you have problems using your glutes, now when your foot hits the floor, when you're running, now that's that much more impact or ground reaction force that has to translate through the foot, the lower leg, the upper leg, through the hip, and into the low back. Unfortunately, you know, the part of it is that the back wasn't meant to move a whole lot, right? Because it's basically a unit of the body that's meant to stabilize. Well, if the area that's supposed to move isn't moving, well, the low back is going to take a lot of that brunt of the energy coming up from the ground up into the body. So we have to your point, when you really look at the hips as far as how mobile they are and how stable they are. So getting into some of the exercises that you can do, there's a lot you can do to strengthen the glutes, because when your hips are stronger, that means the low back doesn't have to work as much.
Mm-hmm. And those of you guys that are just joining us, we're talking about training through injury with the lower back. I'm Wendy Batts with Ken Miller. And Ken, I think you just bring up a really, really good, important, you know, just basically everything that you said about talking about just how we move and how we need to be able to move in 3 planes of motion and accelerate and decelerate. But another one thing I did want to mention in this episode, because I find it to be very common with my clients, and Ken, I'm sure probably yours as well, is if you notice your posture isn't just about a low back arch, but you notice that your feet are slightly turned out. So ideally, you want your toes pointed straight ahead, just like you have skis. But unfortunately, because people's calves get tight, their feet slightly turn out, and that's what causes your feet to turn out. So you weren't really made to be that way. That's just how life has you now, because that's your new quote norm due to tightness and a compensation. But when that happens, a lot of times it'll cause this muscle called the piriformis that is basically in your upper butt region. I mean, if we're going to try to keep it layman's terms, and it attaches, you know, obviously to your pelvis. And this muscle isn't made to be like a gigantic glute max, like doing this powerful muscle. But unfortunately, when your feet turn out, it actually ends up working a lot harder than it should. And depending on your genetic makeup and depending on who you are, your sciatic nerve can either run right beside it or through it. And so if that muscle is irritated, it's tight, it's unhappy, then what ends up happening is it can compress on your sciatic nerve. And so people are like, oh my goodness, I feel like my leg is going numb, or I really feel this pain and tension in this area. And it's usually like in that low back kind of upper glute region. If you can sit on a foam roller on that muscle and you just marinate on it, and I don't care if you sit on it for a whole TV show, whatever it takes, as long as your leg doesn't go numb, because you don't want to be on the nerve, and you can get that muscle to relax. I had a client literally getting ready to go into surgery, and all we did was relax that muscle and got her glutes to fire, and her low back pain disappeared, and her just by realigning her hips and getting that muscle to lay off of that nerve. And it's amazing what we as trainers can do, but you also have to be dedicated on the other end, whether you're the client or, you're the fitness enthusiast that are having some of these issues.
Yeah, and I think we just need to clarify, Wendy, that we're not telling people not to get surgery if if it's been diagnosed that they can't, but they, they should do what they can to move better. And if you can get better on your own through movement, through, and I love that example that you bring up, because it means that there are things that we can do to manage our own bodies, right? So if we're empowered to know that, okay, well, I move this way because I have some certain muscles that are doing too much, and I have muscles that aren't doing enough. And then if you understand that, then you know that there's muscles that need to relax. In your example, it's using some kind of self-myofascial technique, as well as doing some strengthening exercise for those muscles that aren't doing enough. So in that case, you addressed what can be a typical, quote unquote, typical overactive muscle with the hip rotator of the piriformis. But also if you're doing some kind of bridge or clamshell or something that gets the glutes to wake up, right? It's supposed to be the most powerful muscle group in the body. And if you can do that and relieve tension through your own body, you can self-manage, and you don't need well, we all need a personal trainer, right? Accountability, exercise recommendations, and all that stuff. But we don't have to go through such extremes as, going under the knife and having surgery, when if we've explored everything else and and you're limited, more and more limited on your options as far as pain relief, then so be it. But I think the example that you have there, Wendy, and I've got some examples of my own, as well as I'm sure anybody else who's assessed somebody, looked at where they're dysfunctional, and help them find some answers of, okay, well, if I'm only with you 1 hour a week, and there's 168 hours in the week, well, what are you going to do the rest of the week if this comes up again? Are you going to pay $150 for a personal trainer just to tell you to do the same things that you've been taught to do? No, doesn't make sense. So from that vantage point, if you have the means to self-manage these issues, especially with the low back, again, at the prevalence of 80% of the population, and if you can find an answer that you can duplicate on your own, there's no reason why, when this, or if, I guess it's not so much a matter of if, it's a matter of when. For a lot of people, it's okay, well, what are you going to do about it when the situation arises?
And I think it's important, and I'm, I've shared this story multiple times, and the reason why I am very passionate about doing corrective exercise and really spending time on foam rolling certain areas and stretching the areas that I know need it. Because again, we don't need to statically stretch muscles that are in a good position. At that point, we would do a different type of stretching to warm them up before activity. But if you know that there's an area that is compressed or, like tight, and you know that, and you know exactly the musculature that you should work on in order to relieve that, it can make a significant difference. And, I was having some issue actually in my cervical spine. I know we're talking about lower back, but they said that the only way to relieve my issue was actually through surgery, and that they wanted to fuse two of my discs together. And if you think about the spine, you've got, imagine you have a jelly donut, and then you've got, jelly donuts that go, you got a jelly donut, then you got a space of something, I don't know, something gooey in the middle, and then another jelly donut. So think of your spine as jelly donuts. And then you've got a muscle that's actually compressing it because it's tight. Then if you keep on compressing and compressing and compressing and compressing, eventually that jelly is coming out the other side of the donut, right? If you squish one side, it comes out the other. What we need to do is that compression that's squishing that donut, we need just to say, hey, lay off and let it go back to where it's supposed to, and then strengthen the side that was allowing that compression to happen. And oftentimes you can fix yourself without having to do that. And I am someone that did that. I never had surgery. I ended up saying, let me try corrective exercise first. It's something I have to do every day. I do traction, I do corrective exercises, and I have full use of my limbs, my neck, and everything. I'm rocking it like I did back in my younger years. And so, just as you said, Ken, I mean, get professional advice, make sure that it's something that what it is. See if there's any alternative to surgery by doing strengthening. If there's not, obviously you need to do what's in your best interest, but don't just say, oh, this surgeon knows everything. He went to school for this, when I had another way out by just saying, let me try this first, and then know that this is my other alternative if that doesn't work. Please don't cut on yourself.
Yeah, no, and if you don't have to, and I think the other part of it is, Wendy, is the fact that, and we're kind of talking about the term or the process of, the squeaky wheel often gets the grease, and a lot of times the low back is that squeaky wheel. So a lot of times you want to focus on that. So there are, with heat and vibration, you can do a lot to relieve some of the tension, but sometimes the issue is somewhere else. And to your point that you brought up earlier is like, it could be the foot and ankle. Your foot and ankle may not be moving well. And the example I brought up with the shoulders, it could be your shoulders aren't moving well, and that's putting more stress down the chain versus up the chain, as in the example of the foot and ankle. So getting that guidance and actually evaluating yourself from a holistic standpoint, not just from a metaphysical holistic, but from a whole total body movement pattern, and seeing, okay, is my low back an issue? I mean, one extreme example is that I had a baseball player, again, shoulder issue, but his right shoulder issue as a pitcher was because he couldn't stabilize through his left foot and ankle. And the low back is, right midway up that chain. So as an example, that was a more of extreme example of going up and down the chain, but there's been plenty of times just by getting somebody to get their foot and ankle to move better, tension in the low back has gotten better. And that could be for a lot of reasons, right? You've stimulated some proprioceptors at the bottom of the feet, which now have this connection with the low back and the hip region. So you've just basically turned on, certain muscles up the chain versus down the chain just by stimulating the feet. So again, if that is your background as a trainer or even as a consumer, as far as looking at your foot mechanics and seeing how well your foot and ankle can move to help, again, the hip extend. So if the ankle doesn't flex well, neither will the hip, as you said earlier, Wendy. So that's just another example of making sure that not limiting your vision on what needs help, but looking at, it could be, hey, maybe you just need to take off the shoes 30 or 60 more minutes a day for you to feel, have the back move the way it's supposed to move.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many different things. I know we could probably spend hours and hours talking about, common reasons for low back pain and everything. But I think, for me, the key takeaways is if you have low back discomfort for any reason, there is hope. And there are certain things that you can try on your own. It's just, you have to commit to anywhere from, I usually say 3 to 5 minimum, 3 to 5 times a week. Take your foam roller and, foam roll your calves, foam roll the outside of your quad, like on the side of your leg, foam roll your piriformis, which is in your upper, side of your hip, the front of your hip. So your TFL, and then your lats, and try to get some movement in your thoracic spine. There are so many different things. Just if you take your foam roller, find something tender, sit and marinate on it until that pain either goes away or you feel a significant decrease in tension. And then statically stretch those same muscles. And if you do that on a flexibility side, that's going to help. But then once you do the flexibility side, Ken, what should they do after that? Because remember, what we do on one side of the joint that's overactive, we need to do what on the other side?
Yeah, you need to activate. You got to move. So a lot of people don't do hip strengthening, right? A lot of people don't do balance work, something that's going to integrate the hip. So I always say, when in doubt, just move. Again, pain-free range of motion without compensating, or in the example we brought up earlier, without arching your back or tilting your hips forward. Get up and move. Turn on those hips. Nothing wrong with laying on your back on the floor and doing 12 to 20 floor bridges. If you get one set, you've done more than just sitting down. And I think to add on to your takeaway, Wendy, is just don't sit down too much. Don't if you can, break up those 60 to 90-minute bouts of sitting, and don't do too much of one thing, for an extended period of time. So take your breaks, move around a little bit, get some blood flow. And like you said, Wendy, if that means foam rolling, if that means doing some floor bridges, just something to get some blood into the area. Because a lot of times, we're feeling, or we're more sensitive to pain because we just don't have a lot of oxygen. So just get up and move. And I think, that's not the end all be all, but it's better than just sitting and doing too much of the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over again. So
That's right. That's right.
yeah, this was a good one. I think hopefully, if you guys are unfortunately experiencing some low back issues, that there are some takeaways that you've taken from both Wendy and I. And as always, Wendy, thank you so much for all that you've had to share today. It's always a pleasure. And if you want to hear more from us on Random Fit, we'll do what we can to give you guys what you want. So just let us know by like, follow, subscribe, and comment. And again, until next time, take care and be well.